Hello again, guys. It is Freeze700. We are back with some Mass Effect lore. This time, what the fuck is the Batarian Hegemony? Now, the Batarian Hegemony is one of the most fascinating objects to me because it's essentially a North Korea of the Mass Effect universe. But they operate a little differently. You see, they're not communist. They're still autocratic. They still are very tyrannical over their citizens. But at the same time, it's also ingrained into their people to be tyrannic, to have this social hierarchy where one man trumps over all the billions of lives under his rule. So it's kind of hard to say at what point is the government evil versus just the people who serve the government are just fucking evil. So let's talk about it. What is the Batarian Hegemony? So long ago, back when the Council was still new, where they only had the Turians, the Salarians, the Asari, and lastly the Volus. This is pretty much the only races that are there. The Krogan were around, but they were still considered a bit of a threat, even though they were beaten back with the Genophage and beaten back with the Turian military. But the Batarians arose, and the Batarians quickly introduced themselves as negotiators, people who are willing to talk, people who are willing to establish diplomatic boundaries. And at first, it seemed fine. That's great. But then it started to turn bad really quickly. You see, the Batarians were given immediate access and immediate embassy on the Citadel about 100 years after the Volus were given it. And that's actually pretty major because the Volus were so integral to the Citadel. It was kind of a shit on the Volus that here's this new spacefaring species and they immediately get an embassy. This really did piss off a few of them, like the Elcor and the Volus. Because after all, the Volus established the galactic currency. They established the galactic banks, where the Citadel was actually suffering majorly economically because they couldn't seem to get funds together because everyone's using different currency. People don't know what the exact value is of certain objects because they keep bartering with different beliefs, different cultural backgrounds, different needs and supplies and demands from different areas. The Volus established this way of trading. They established a very well-organized economic situation. The Batarians did absolutely nothing for the Citadel. They were just simply a spacefaring race that was expanding and had a very large territory. Now, one of the big issues with the Batarians is that the Council didn't really like them too much because the Batarians' way of negotiating was always kind of like just going into a room and just screaming and crying, demanding that everyone gives you this. And if they don't give you something, then you're just going to lash out at them. That's pretty much the way the Batarians were. It's actually really interesting when you look into the codexes and you look into the history of the Batarians, where most of their diplomacy has just been, give us this planet, give us this planet, give us this planet, give us these arms too. Let's get some of these guns. Yeah. Give us the access to a dreadnought. Give us this. And then anytime the Council would just say, hey, what are you giving us? What have you done for the Council? You don't seem to be doing anything. Well, you're just discriminating against Batarians. It's in our culture. I'm not joking. The Council tried to ream it into the Batarians that slavery is wrong, that slavery is a amoral practice, that they should stop doing it. And the Batarians whined and complained and cried that the Council is discriminating them because slavery is so ingrained into their culture, so ingrained into their history. Every single nation in the Batarian homeworld has slavery. That's just something that they are grown up with. And it makes sense considering that their society is built on a caste system where the higher up to the caste you go, the more and more you get to use your power to show over your lessers and show them why you're higher up in the chain than they are. So the Batarian hegemony is not exactly this amazing model. And this has, of course, caused many issues with the Council, who are a lot more democratic than they are. They actually care about their people's lives. They care about their individualism. They even give certain colonies independence to do whatever they want. The Batarian hegemony does not do this. It is a very strict control, direct control by the Prime Minister of the hegemony. Now, this has also been interesting to note is that the Batarians are very hostile at the borders. They've actually attacked a lot of colonies. There was an independent Asari colony that got taken over a few years before the Alliance existed. There was a Solarian world that was taken over and bombarded by Batarians. And mind you, by bombarded, I mean they actually bombed the fucking shit out of it. And this is some of the Batarians that Zaid mentions, is that their scorched earth tactics are really, really severe compared to other species. See, other species, when they do scorched earth tactics, they may only burn maybe an island. They may burn maybe half a city to the ground, but they're not going to do the whole planet. The Batarians will. They have no care in the world about the destruction they cause in the galaxy. They have no care in the world for the waste that they produce from their war machines. They don't care. The Batarian hegemony is a very uncaring machine that's just full-on destruction. So the Council has never really liked them. And it's been one of those things where the Council tries their best to ignore the Batarians, even though they've been crossing the line a lot. They're just really, really, really bad. If you look at them as a house guest, imagine someone coming into your house and claiming dominance in your kitchen, and then they just keep on taking chairs out of your living room. They keep stepping on the pillows in your living room. They just start taking shit, but they don't seem to leave that kitchen. They just seem to stay there. So you just kind of think, okay, I'm just going to ignore the guy, but there are times where I'm going to have to tell him to stop the shit and cut it off. This is how the Council pretty much viewed the Batarian hegemony. And the citizens is where it gets very interesting. You see, in the Batarian hegemony, the only way to climb up the hegemony is by money. You have to show that you have wealth. You have to show that you have merit to your claims that, hey, I should be higher up the list because look at all this money I've got. Hey, I should be up this list because look at how good I am. Look at how much money I can make for you, the guy who's past my station. This is the way the Batarians are. And this has actually been very interesting, is that since the citizens believe in this, the profit and stuff like that, this obviously eliminates the idea that they're communists. I thought they were communists, but they're not. You see, this is the reason why Batarians have a lot of slave trading. They have a lot of slaver rings. They have a lot of pirates. The reason why is because these are citizens who are trying to make a name for themselves. They can easily make a shit ton of money with their slaves, a shit ton of money stealing supplies from other governments, and then selling it to the hegemony in exchange for power, in exchange for a position in the government, in exchange of a fully autonomous unit. There is some things that the Batarian hegemony does allow. They will allow a commander of their own military to form his own autonomous piracy group. They do allow this. The Batarian hegemony even has a Batarian external forces. These guys are the ones who will go out, form terrorist organizations, form slave rings, form piracy gangs. And these are full military officials of the Batarian hegemony. And they're allowed to do this because, as I said earlier, it all loops back. They're able to provide money, they're able to provide resources to their government, so it shows that they earn their position, and they're allowed to pretty much get a blind eye, just do whatever the fuck they want. This Batarian hegemony does have its liberties if you are a very cruel, vindictive motherfucker. Now, the Batarian hegemony's military power, you may think, oh, well, it's got to be powerful. They don't give a fuck about damaging planets. They don't give a fuck about how much waste their guns produce because their factories, the Batarian armed industries, they don't care how much waste their factories pollute. They don't care about the health of the planet declining because they're just making all this radioactive sludge. These guns that they make cause such catastrophic booms that they actually shift the tectonic plates. They don't care. So you would think that their military is pretty strong. Well, sadly, no, it's not. You see, most of the Batarian military is actually their external force. This is where they would just simply fund pirate gangs. They would give a blank check to a bunch of pirates, whether they're human, whether they're Batarian, whether they're Krogan. They don't care. As long as these pirates do what the government says, which is, hey, we don't really like the Volus right now, so every Volus ship you kill, we're going to give you another supply of guns. every Volus captain you bring to us and we take his credit shit, we're going to give you more money. This is the way the Batarian hegemony works. This way, they can conduct aggressive, violent tactics against their enemies, weakening their enemies, without actually having an official war declared, without having officially committed to a fight. This is very genius, but it's also very scummy, and it's very obvious to the rest of the galaxy that, hey, the Batarians are funding the pirates. But there's not a whole lot that the Citadel can do, because half of the galaxy is known as the Terminus Systems, which is run by warlords, gangsters, thugs, mercenaries. The Batarian hegemony has their pockets in all these groups. They're very well protected. It's very hard for a nation or the Citadel to actually declare war against the Batarian hegemony without having all these subgroups joining in on the fight. This was something that the Alliance was dealing with. When they were taking over the Skyllian Verge, they had to deal with several piracy raids. They almost lost the capital of Elysium to just nothing but pirates and mercenaries. This is how powerful those groups are. This is why it's something that you tread very, very lightly. It's something that we actually could see in some medieval situations, if you look through history, where mercenary armies were so strong that they could easily topple over a king. So some kings had to tread very carefully with certain mercenary groups. Like, they may have raided one of their lands, but their army strength is so valuable that it pretty much secures the throne. This is how the Batarian hegemony works. By having these extremely strong forces, one, their own citizens are not in danger, and two, these forces are all operating independently. It's very, very hard for someone like a Salarian who's all about subterfuge and infiltrating people's ranks. It's very hard for Salarians to know, oh, the Batarians are attack here, here, and here. That's very difficult when it's 40 other mercenary groups who are doing the work for the Batarian hegemony. This is where it gets very, very difficult. You may know where 10 of those groups are going, but what about the other 30? What about the other guys? What are they doing? This requires a lot of work. This is why the Citadel has tried their best to just simply ignore the Batarians. And even when humanity was a first spacefaring species and was out expanding, this is why the Council refused to aid them, because the Batarians are a threat, sure, but they're a threat that no matter what you do, they're really not going to go away. They're just something that you could just pour money into fighting them off. Sure, you may succeed, you may actually beat them back, but in the end, you've just weakened yourself for this ignorable threat that you could have just ignored. And sure, he destroys a colony, sure, he destroys 2 colonies, but that's probably not worth destabilizing your fucking currency, issuing huge, massive fleets, losing thousands of people's lives, when you could only lose just a few hundred because they just took a few colonists. Now, because of the Council's outright refusal to help the Batarian government when humanity first came into existence in this galactic community, the Batarians closed their embassy down because, as I said earlier, they like to demand stuff. They don't really like to give. So when the Council refused to say, oh, humanity, stop expanding into the Skyllian Verge, the Batarians were very upset. They were like, really, you're not going to help us now? You're not going to help us in our fucking time of need? Fuck you guys. And they left. Now, by this point, the Batarian government was obviously very weak. They didn't really have much of a actual fleet. They didn't have much of an actual army. They just, again, relied more on their raiders, on their autonomous mercenary groups, their autonomous generals doing whatever it is they felt like. So the actual government of it was actually very fragile. But this is where the Alliance was actually very powerful, in the sense is that they were organized. They were a full-fledged military, and more importantly, they had tons and tons of fleets. The only issue was that the Alliance had so many colonies, it was hard to protect them all. So this was actually profitable for the Batarian hegemony to go all out against the Systems Alliance. The only problem is that it's a lot like the Vietnam War, where both sides can't really expand into each other's territory for fear of reprisal. So the Alliance was pretty much just holding their colonies and clearing out pirate raids, pirate outposts, but they couldn't go one step further and attack a Batarian colony. They couldn't do that for fear of all the Terminus systems joining in. The Batarians, on the other hand, They couldn't officially release their military, their navy, against the Systems Alliance, because if they do, then it would be an open act of war, and that would draw the Citadel to the fight, which is, again, something they don't want to deal with. This is where the Batarian hegemony is very, very interesting, is that they're playing a very dangerous game where they always deny any involvement despite all the fucking evidence. But they've pretty much made themselves public enemy number one. They made it where everybody hates them. Now, the Batarian hegemony has actually used this to their benefit, where they feed propaganda to their citizens and lock their borders, where they've enforced a pretty much permanent isolation from the rest of the community, where what they do is they tell their citizens to stay in the Batarian hegemony because all the aliens are out to get them. The other aliens are racist. They don't look and try to understand the Batarian way of life, like slavery. They just simply judge us, tell us that we're scum, tell us that we are terrible criminals, and will persecute you on sight. This is what the Batarian hegemony has been feeding to their citizens for hundreds of years. So, now that they have been pretty much kicked out of the alliance, kicked out of the council, pretty much from the ongoing hostilities with humanity, they've made it even harder. They've made it where the propaganda is even more biased. They've made it where humanity is even worse than the other Citadel races. So this is why you'll see it a lot where any world that has Batarian people on it, Batarian citizens are usually outright hostile to human citizens, always declaring them that they're cheapskates, that they're stealers or thieves who stole land from the hegemony, that they're fucking racist because they're always against the Batarians and they're only out for human interests, which is, again, very interesting considering the Batarian hegemony only acts in Batarian interest, or more importantly, only in the Prime Minister's interest. They don't even act in their own people's interests. They don't invest a lot into safety measures. We see this a lot in the DLC, The Arrival, where equipment is just kind of laying out. There's many times where panels to machinery that is very dangerous are just left open. So safety regulations are, again, not really a concern to Batarian hegemony. Makes sense. They also leave some very interesting Varen. This is something that's very interesting, is that they're all about dominating others, dominating other species, dominating whatever. And it's actually shown in their military where they do dominate Varen. They do dominate war beasts. They actually do use the local fauna to their advantage. So, when you fight a Batarian armed force, you're going to be expecting a guy with a lot of incinerators, just burning the trees, burning the ground, salting the earth. And you're going to expect a lot of war beasts at his disposal, like Varen, that are just going to charge in and just cleave your fucking armor off with their nasty bites. And it's all because the Batarians are just nasty, vicious people. And the hegemony reflects these values to the extreme. Now, despite the fact that the Batarians are obviously not in the galactic community anymore, they pretty much impose an isolation, they still provide linguistics to the galaxy, ways of speaking to Batarians. This is, of course, so that way they can communicate with other species, but it's also so that way other species can communicate with them. As, after all, many of the pirate gangs that they do fund are actually run by humans. They are run by other species, some of them Turians, some of them Krogan. So it is kind of important for them to release these linguistics so that way people can speak to them. But even though people could speak to Batarians, the Batarian government does not allow Batarian citizens to engage in open diplomatic talks with the other alliances. This was something that was kind of brought up recently in Mass Effect 3, is where when the Batarian hegemony does fall, and its citizens are flooding into the Citadel, it's nice that they know how to communicate, but the Batarians are pretty quiet. They don't really know what the hell to do, because here they are with the Citadel species that are giving them aid, when all that they've been told about Citadel species that they would discriminate them, they would not understand their ways, and yet here they are. So in Mass Effect 3, we do see it where Batarians are actually for once quiet, whereas in Mass Effect 2, when you see Batarians in Omega, they always make some snide remark to you. They always make loud vocal dialogue about how humans are filthy or how they can't stand other species. But in Mass Effect 3, they're very, very quiet. Very, very quiet. Because the veil of propaganda is now dropped. And now all they have is just their religion. Which their religion may still have some of that dominating stuff in it. But it's a huge reflection on the people where now they have to realize, oh shit, our government lied to us. Our government is actually the problem, not the Citadel species. So it was a pretty interesting look into it. And after all, it is something that we could probably discuss in another video where at what point is the government to blame versus the people? It's a lot like some countries we know of today. Like in South America, you'll see some countries where the governments are outright cruel. This is with Cuba. But then you can look at other countries, like some places in Mexico, where government officials are corrupt without a doubt. But then you see that's also the people, too, who are corrupt without a doubt. Like, they don't mind selling abandoned kids to child slavery if in exchange they get, like, a nice TV or some shit like that. So it is something that's very interesting when you look at the Batarian hegemony, is that the first thought you would think of is communists, that like North Korea. But reality is they're a little bit more complicated than that. They're a little bit more interesting than that. And they still have their own democratic freedoms, but it's extremely, extremely limited, and it's for only specific people in specific caste. So, this has been Freeza 700. I am out. See you guys next time. As always, like, comment, and subscribe.